Hello students! Today starts a series of virtual lessons for you as we prepare you for CXC. Today's session we will look at summary writing, which as we all know is the first question on the paper 2 of the English A exam. In that extract, we are asked to summarize the main points along with any main supporting details in 120 words or less. It is important that you read the instructions given because sometimes you may be asked to summarize the entire passage, you may be asked to summarize what someone said, or you may be asked to summarize specifically one part of the extract. Once you've figured out what it is you're required to do, you will begin the process of writing your summary. As always, with English, we approach it as a science. There are a number of steps that you can remember, and once you remember them, writing becomes easier. So today we will look at the science of summary writing. In any good session, it's important to measure what you have learned at the end of the session. And one way of doing so is ensuring that you know what it is you're supposed to know at the end of it. So, just like in your classroom sessions, I will explain to you what it is you should know at the end of the summary, or essentially what it is we're going to be looking at. There are three main objectives in today's session. We're going to define what a summary is. We are going to look at the characteristics or concepts of a good summary. And lastly, we are going to look at the step-by-step process, that science that I was talking about earlier, in ensuring that we write the perfect summary for our examiners in that exam. So, let's start off with what is a summary. A summary is a shortened or condensed form of an original extract. However, when it's summarized, it is written in your own words. And what you do at this point is you reduce all the unnecessary details. Essentially, a summary is like a filter, a strainer, a colander. We take out all the unnecessary things we need and we keep the most crucial parts to ensure that we write within the word limit CXC is asking for. If you look at the diagram on the screen, you will see that filtration process working. If you look at it, you will see what comprises the original extended passage, and ultimately, at the bottom, what comprises the summarized or abridged version. And so, like every good summary writer, we become filtration specialists. So, what's in a summary? In any summary, there is a need to be simple, clear, and concise. For simple summaries, what you're doing is restating exactly what the author said originally, but in fewer words. This is important because remember, you have a word limit. And therefore, by extracting and juxtaposing the main ideas along with any supporting information for it, will ensure that you just do a simpler version of the original. Then, of course, we come to concise. You have a word limit, and therefore it's important that you follow that pattern of sticking to the word limit. What that does is it allows you to be as brief as possible in ensuring you relate the main idea of the extract. And lastly, of course, you need to be clear. No person reading your summary should ever wonder if all of these concepts are connected to each other. And so when you write for clarity and for clear purposes, you are essentially ensuring that somebody understands what it is you have written about. We move now into how to do a summary. The most crucial part you must remember is there are elements of a summary that must be included. And so we begin first with reading the extract. I always advise my students to read the extract twice. When you read for the first time, you're just reading to get accustomed and acquainted to the extract. When you read the second time, you are looking at the question specifically you're asked to do, and so you're looking for all of those supporting details that will assist. Then, of course, what you will do, because we are looking for the main ideas, you look at each paragraph and you try to determine what is meant or what is said in each paragraph as it relates to the topic as a whole. And then, of course, you decide on the most important details, you decide on the main concepts, and you move from there. Then, because we have to make a summary into a whole, we're going to combine that main idea and that summarized set of details. And then lastly, of course, we are going to ensure that we use our own words as best and as far as possible. There is a 6-step process that we can use, which will make writing summaries easier. One of the hardest things that students have said to me is, "Miss, a summary is hard." Summary writing is not hard. Summary writing takes practice, but it also takes practice remembering a few steps. I've developed a process to help students work their way through writing a summary. The first thing I tell them to do is to find the main idea. The second thing is to find all of the supporting details which essentially tell us about that main idea. Then I ask them to combine the main idea along with the supporting details. And then, of course, I ask them to edit, looking and removing all of the unnecessary things in that first draft. And then lastly, I ensure that they write a final draft, which is the draft I will be writing. For the next couple of minutes, we will go through each step, step by step, and ensuring that you understand exactly what it is you have to do. The first step in our scientific approach to summary writing is to find the main idea. I always tell students to read the passage twice. In the first reading, you're asking yourself, what is the passage about? You ask yourself, who or what is the passage talking about? And then lastly, you ask yourself, what is being said about the person or the who or the what the passage is about. On your second reading, you will look for some other things. You will look for things like what is the big picture? What is being talked about? Once you have figured out what the big picture is, there is a little page on the other side of your answer sheet, a blank square box, and you are going to write down all of the main idea and the supporting details to assist you as you work your way through that second reading. Now, again, remember we're talking science and ensuring that we write summaries using a standardized format. Over the years, I've said to my students, there's a concept called morphed. And what it is, it's an acronym of concepts that we eliminate. Remember, we're working on a time constraint as well as a word limit. And so there are some areas that you can automatically eliminate. And the easy way to remember what to eliminate is to remember the acronym morphed. And you see it on the screen behind me. So, what are morpheds? What we have is essentially minor details, opinions, repetitions, examples, and that would spell us what? More. And then we move across to feds. We look at, we will remove, in fact, figurative language, examples, dialogue and quotations, and lastly, any statistical data that is included in the extract. The second stage that we move to is called looking for the supporting details. The supporting details are important because as much as we eliminate the morpheds, we still need to support the main idea. And so what we're looking for is things that we can summarize together from all of those morpheds to ensure that we support the concept of the main idea and add, how you'd like to say, the meat to the bones of the summary. And so there are a number of things. If you look at the image that's presented, you will see what consists of the supporting details. And so what's important, I always advise students, go through each paragraph, work it one by one. And as you do so, you will discover that you're able to look for opening sentences or topic sentences, and you're able to look at any supporting details that will accompany those opening sentences, and you'd be able to summarize them. The next stage of writing a summary is that we are going to write summary sentences. Remember, you still have that blank extract on the examiner's answer sheet. And so you're able to jot down 1 or 2 summary sentences for each paragraph that is presented. Oftentimes, CXE extracts are a minimum of 5 paragraphs and can go as much as 10. But the idea is for you to find at least 4 to 5 things that you can use as summary sentences to support your main idea. Now, this is important. If you find that you are repeating ideas, it means that you've missed some crucial details. And so it's important that you go back and reread the extract for a 3rd time, eliminating repetitive details and moving on to ensure that you include all of the critical data that is needed to ensure that you write a summary in 120 words or less. We're now at step 4 of our scientific plan towards writing a summary. We are now at the crucial point of combining our main idea along with any supporting details. What's important here? Here is where we use our transitional words and phrases. Now, I know this concept frightens a lot of students. In fact, many students struggle with it, but it's not anything to be afraid of. In fact, you earn extra marks. You earn, in fact, a crucial number of marks if you are able to use transitional words and phrases correctly, and you use them to ensure that your summary is a skillful adaptation of the original. So, what do transitional words and phrases do? They allow your summary to be read and seem like a unified unit. Oftentimes, I've read extracts from students where I'm not quite sure where they've gotten the information from. It is just an amalgamation of one or two or sometimes three sentences, and they don't seem connected at all. So what is important here? When you use transitional words, this makes the reading clearer. The teacher or your examiner is able to move through and to understand exactly what it is you're talking about. And of course, lastly, the use of transitional words ensure that you sound very clear, but more importantly, you support and reinforce the main idea. Just for a quick reference, I'll put up on the screen some transitional words, and I've categorized them for you into 4 main categories. We're now at stage 5 of the 6-step process. We are at the editing process. And when we get here, what is important is that we reread the extract to ensure that what we have written is actually in sync with what was said before or what we read. Oftentimes, I've read summaries where I'm not quite sure, as I said earlier, where students got the information from. Or this is also the time where you edit to ensure that you have all of the crucial details, you've not missed any, and you've not repeated any. And of course, in doing so, we will eliminate repetitions, we will eliminate unnecessary descriptors, and more importantly, we will ensure that we stick to the word limit. The word limit is important, as I said before. When you write a summary, you're expected to stay within the 120-word limit. And so you have to painstakingly count every single word because this is the skill that is being assessed at this level. And then lastly, of course, because the grammatics of language matter, the mechanics, so to speak, we must ensure that we spell correctly and we use grammar and punctuation correctly. It is important that you check to ensure that you have all of the punctuation marks, you've paragraphed where necessary, and of course you've spelled all of your words correctly. We are now in the final stage of writing our summary, and this is the final draft stage. This is the stage where we will produce the last document that is necessary for our teachers to read or for the examiners to read. And at this stage, you will again edit. And you're editing again, you're checking to ensure that you have all of the details, you ensure that you've used your transitional words well, and of course you double check to make sure that you are within the word limit. As we wrap up today's session, there are a couple of areas I want you to remember. The word limit is crucial. I often tell students that anywhere between 115 and 120 words is acceptable. If you go below 115 words, you may lose crucial information you need that is important in the summary. If you go over 120 words, your teacher or the examiner stops at word 120, and of course, additional information or crucial information that is needed for that summary will not be read. And so if you stick within the range of 115 to 120 words, you'll be on track. Of course, like any exam, you have to learn to write within a certain period of time. The best advice I can give you is that summaries must be written within 40 minutes or less. So practice, 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 because you must ensure that you answer all of the questions. And so if you practice to write a summary within 40 minutes or less, you will have all the time left over for all the other aspects of the paper. What is important to remember is that you must use reported speech. And of course, you must write in the present tense. Oftentimes, extracts have dialogue, they have persons talking. And if those people speaking have important things to say within the extract, you must convert it to reported speech. And of course, you write in the present tense, even if the passage is in the past tense. Again, I'm going to remind you about those transitional words. You saw them earlier in the slides that we presented. And then, of course, the most important thing, please write in continuous prose. And by continuous prose, I mean don't use bullet points. It is disheartening to see students who write in bullet points. They have all of the points necessary and they would score high on content if they had continued to write in prose. And so we want full sentences linked with transitional words, which will help you. The most important thing to remember, however, is to not overuse transitional words. You have to stick to the word limit, and it's important that you understand that transitional words or transitional phrases help you to earn the most marks within summary writing, but an overuse or a misuse of them can result in you being penalized. We will move on to working on an actual summary. I will walk you through the process of identifying the main ideas along with the supporting details and how we can paraphrase and summarize best to arrive at a final finished product. All right, students, let's look at writing the summary. But let's recap quickly from the earlier part of this lesson where we are going to look at determining what the main idea is. So I have here a question. And the question asks us to read carefully the following extract and then summarize the main cause of vandalism and violence which the writer advances. Now here specifically, it's asking you to summarize a specific thing. And so if you remember, we had some concepts which I introduced at the beginning of the lesson. And when we were looking for the main idea here, I did say to you that you should do at least 2 readings. In your first reading, you are going to ask yourself about the basic signal concepts. You're going to scan the passage to see which word occurs most often, ask who or what the extract is about, and determine what is said about the who or the what. And then, of course, we were at the second reading. What is the overall point about the topic? Ask what was the big picture. And then once we found it out, we were to write it down, but also avoid relevant information. So let's look at the extract we were given. Violence and vandalism in the society are escalating. Each day, acts of violence and wanton destructiveness are recorded all over the world. Some law-abiding citizens are of the opinion that harsher penalties and an extension of the police force will curb the present state of violence. But current research by leading psychologists has proved that more policemen, more severe penalties, and greater protection of property will not eradicate the underlying causes of violence and vandalism. Violence and vandalism are the result of a denial of the basic emotional needs of young people. The need for love and a feeling of security is fundamental to the individual in his early life, since it forms the basis of all later relationships. A child needs to experience from birth a loving relationship which moves with him from his parents to his school and then to the larger society. Children need a wide range of experiences to prevent boredom, frustration, and restlessness, which motivate youths into dangerous and forbidden activities. Too often, society does not recognize the efforts of young people. Recognition is given only to those who achieve. The deprived seek admiration and recognition from members of gangs. A feeling of self-reliance is achieved by acts of vandalism and violence. There is also the need for cultivating a sense of responsibility. Opportunities for group activities, for leadership in groups will foster self-control and a sense of responsibility for others. There is also the need for cultivating a sense of responsibility. Opportunities for group activities, for leadership in groups will foster self-control and a sense of responsibility for others. When the basic needs are unfulfilled, then the individual reacts by either withdrawal or attack. He either fights or withdraws into a shell. To fight aggressive behavior with force is useless. It only sets up a vicious circle in which crimes and violence escalate. the only way to deal with the offenders is to attempt to meet some of their basic unfulfilled needs. At this point, students, you will recognize that we're asked to summarize one main thing. And so if you follow me on the screen, you will see that I will highlight what it is we're expected to look at. So we will be paying attention here because it's asked us specifically for that. We're going to be looking at the concepts surrounding violence and vandalism. So let's look at the first paragraph. Yes, violence and vandalism are mentioned in the first paragraph. It tells us about the acts being recorded all over the world. It tells us what some law-abiding citizens feel should be penalties for it or that will curb it. However, it tells us, coming down to the end, that there's some current research that proves that none of these ideas work. And so because the question is asking us to summarize the main cause of vandalism and violence, which according to this writer's opinion exists, we don't find anything in the first paragraph to assist us. So let's look at the second paragraph to see if we find anything that gives us how the writer is feeling about this. He says that violence and vandalism are the result of a denial of the basic emotional needs of young people. So we have one reason posited here, and we can underline that. Continues, the need for love and a feeling of security is fundamental to the individual in his early life, since it forms the basis of all later relationships. A child needs to experience from birth a loving relationship which moves with him from his parents to his school and then to the larger society. Then he tells us that children need a wide range of experiences to prevent boredom, frustration, and restlessness. So he says here, these motivate youths into dangerous and forbidden activities. So we can look at those, we identify them, because he's suggesting that this is one reason or one way that we can curb violence and vandalism. But he's also given us some additional information: love, feeling of security, and of course, that loving relationship which repeats itself, and of course, these experiences which present boredom. So we're finding some concepts that exist within the extract. Now let's look at the rest of the extract. We see here that society does not recognize the efforts of young people. And so those who are deprived seek admiration and recognition from members of gangs. And we have the concept of the feeling of self-reliance. So you have here, which you can highlight, the feeling of self-reliance, recognition, and that the deprived seek admiration and recognition from members of gangs. So ultimately what you have here is that if we recognize the efforts of young people, we ensure that we point out the positive things they do, we give them credits and laud them for it, that we can curb violence as well as vandalism. Then we look down to the rest of the paragraphs. We see the cultivating the sense of responsibility, the issues of opportunities for group activities, for leadership in groups. All of these are reasons that the author is positing as possible ways of curbing violence and vandalism. Now, how then, therefore, do we ensure that we have the best concepts for our summary? So we have to take all of these things that we've highlighted, and we will create a diagram, which I introduced you to earlier, which is the concept of the main idea along with the supporting details. So what are the supporting details? And what is the main idea? In this instance, you would see that we're talking about ways the author feels we can curb violence and vandalism. So that would be our main idea. And then our supporting details would be, and we found at least 3 reasons in this extract to support this. And so we would form our own sentences from this process. Now, in lesson 2, we will go into this into more details. However, I'm going to give you introduce you briefly here at this point to what my summary looks like based on the extract that we presented. So I have a simple sample summary answer here for you. And ultimately, you can also, if you practice this, you can look to see if we've included it. So my summary reads, the primary reason given for the rapid increase in violence and vandalism is society's failure to satisfy the basic needs of young people. If they do not get love and security early, they will be unable to foster positive relationships in life. Now, if you remember, that came in the second paragraph, and so I've summarized that nicely as the primary reason for this. My second paragraph reads, society is failing to provide young people with the recognition they crave for their efforts. Consequently, they acquire self-reliance by turning to gangs, violence, and vandalism. Failing to provide opportunities for youths to inculcate a sense of responsibility, leadership, and self-control through group involvement will result in future crimes. If you remember, paragraph 3 carried this information. And then finally, the author ends with telling us that force is not an option. And so I've summarized this into one sentence to end the summary. Finally, the use of force is not the answer, but actually a catalyst to increase violence in society. Until our next session, remember, find some summary extracts, find some paragraphs, look at your past CXE papers. I may bring one of them for you. And so practice writing your summaries. And so when we go through this process in the next lesson, you will discover whether or not you're on the right track. It's always helpful to write a summary. So until our next class, goodbye.